The wind howled that night like it was trying to tear the very skin off the earth. Snow fell in thick sheets, blanketing the small town in an unforgiving silence. The streets were empty, deserted, and no one in their right mind would have been. Out in such bitter cold. But Margaret Johnson was still awake. At 72 years old, she had grown used to long nights. The house creaked in the storm, and she sat in her worn rocking chair, her Bible resting on her lap. She had lived in this house all her life, alone for the last 20 years since her husband passed. Tonight, she told herself, was just like any other winter night. Until she heard the faintest sound. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't the groan of old wood. It was something softer, fragile, a cry. At first she thought her ears were playing tricks on her. But then it came again, weak, desperate, muffled by the wind. Margaret froze, her heart beating fast. She rose from her chair and walked to the front door. The old woman hesitated, her hand hovering above the lock. When she finally pulled the door open, the sight nearly stopped her breath. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, with tattoos creeping up his neck and across his hands. His leather jacket, patched with the unmistakable skull and wings insignia of the Hells Angels, was frosted over with snow. Beside him stood a young woman, her face pale and lips trembling, clutching a bundle wrapped in a thin blanket. The faint cry came again from inside the blanket. Margaret's first instinct was fear. Her husband had warned her about bikers like these decades ago, and even now every news story seemed to brand them as dangerous men. She opened her mouth, ready to tell them to move along, but then the young woman shifted the bundle, and the blanket fell back just enough for Margaret to see the tiny face of a newborn. The baby's skin was pale, his lips tinged with blue. He was barely crying anymore, his little chest struggling for each breath. Margaret's heart broke in an instant. Without another thought, she stepped aside. "Get in here," she said, her voice firm but urgent. The biker hesitated. His eyes, cold and wary, studied her. He looked like a man who wasn't used to asking for help, who didn't trust strangers. But then his wife's knees buckled slightly, and Margaret reached out to steady her. "Don't just stand there," she scolded. "Bring that baby inside, before he freezes to death." The man's jaw tightened, but he gave a sharp nod and stepped into the warmth of her small home. The storm closed the door behind them. With a heavy slam. Margaret didn't waste time. She guided the woman to the couch, gently lifting the bundle from her arms. She peeled back the blanket and gasped. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, and he was ice cold to the touch. She cradled him close to her chest, whispering softly, "You're safe now, little one, you're safe." The young woman broke into sobs, covering her face with her hands. The biker knelt by her side, holding her shoulder, his expression torn between shame and desperation. Margaret worked quickly, wrapping the baby in warm towels she had pulled from the dryer earlier. She placed him against her chest, letting her body heat seep into his tiny frame. Slowly, the baby's cries grew louder, stronger, and color began to return to his cheeks. Margaret rocked him gently, her own tears slipping down her wrinkled face. After what felt like an eternity, the baby finally fell asleep, warm and safe in her arms. The young woman whispered, "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." Margaret smiled, softly. "No need to thank me. A child should never have to suffer the cold. What's his name?" The biker answered this time, his voice low and rough. "Matthew." "Matthew," Margaret repeated, brushing the baby's soft cheek with her finger. "A strong name for a strong little boy." For the rest of the night, Margaret fed them hot soup and gave them blankets. She listened as the young woman, Emily, explained how they had been traveling cross-country, trying to find a safe place to settle with their newborn. They had run out of money, and when their car broke down just outside town, they had been stranded in the storm. Margaret didn't ask many questions. She didn't care about patches or reputations. All she saw was a mother, a father, and a baby who needed shelter. By morning, the storm had passed. The biker, who introduced himself only as Bear, thanked her in his gruff way, though his eyes revealed a depth of gratitude he didn't know how to voice. Before they left, Emily hugged Margaret tightly, whispering again and again how they could never repay her kindness. Margaret watched them disappear down the snowy road, convinced she'd never see them again. But she was wrong. A week later, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the ground began to tremble. At first, Margaret thought it was another storm rolling in, but then came the sound. The low, thunderous rumble of engines. She stepped onto her porch, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. One by one, motorcycles appeared at the end of the road. Not one, not two, but dozens of them, roaring in formation. Their headlights cut through the dusk like a wall of fire. Her breath caught. The bikes pulled up in front of her house, lined up neatly across the street. Leather jackets, shining chrome, and the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels filled her vision. It was a sight that would have terrified anyone else. But Margaret felt strangely calm. From the center of the group, Bear stepped forward, his leather jacket gleaming. Emily walked beside him, holding little Matthew, bundled warmly in a new blanket. Margaret's hands trembled as they approached. Bear stopped at the foot of her porch. His voice was steady, but there was emotion in it he couldn't hide. "You saved my son's life. If it weren't for you, we'd have lost him. We don't forget things like that." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. She looked at Emily, who was smiling through her own tears, and then at the baby who now looked healthy and strong. One by one, the bikers removed their helmets. Some bowed their heads. Others simply stood in silence, their presence a wall of respect. Bear continued, his voice breaking just slightly. "You didn't care who we were. You didn't judge us. You just opened your door. That kind of kindness, it's rare. And we want you to know you'll never be alone, not ever again." Before Margaret could respond, one of the bikers stepped forward with a box. He set it gently at her feet. Inside was food, medicine, blankets, and an envelope, stuffed with cash. Another handed her a brand new generator still in its packaging. Another brought firewood stacked neatly by her porch. Margaret covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Bear shook his head. "We do. Because family isn't just blood. It's who stands with you when it matters most. And after what you did for us, you're family now." Margaret couldn't stop the tears as Emily hugged her again, placing little Matthew into her arms. The baby gurgled happily, as if he understood somehow that this woman had saved him. The roar of the engines filled the night again as the bikers departed, but the sound was no longer frightening. To Margaret, it was a promise, a reminder that even in the unlikeliest places, compassion could build bridges stronger than fear. From that day forward, Margaret was never alone. Every week, bikers stopped by her house, checking in on her, fixing things, bringing groceries. They called her Mama Mags. Her once quiet life became filled with laughter, with protection, with the warmth of a family she never expected. And all because, on one freezing night, she chose kindness over fear. Years later, when people asked Margaret about the bikers who had become her family, she always said the same thing with a smile. "All I did was open the door.